I'm resident of Collinwood, Joel Sands for YouTube. I'm joined by my buddy Patrick McCray and my buddy Gordan Dymowski. Since Patrick's short on time, we're gonna let him go first. So, what did you think of this episode, Patrick?
What a great episode in concept, and to me, it ends up illustrating everything that I'm not crazy about TV westerns of this era. I think it's slow. I don't really care about what's going on. They really made it feel like, an episode of Big Valley or something, in its own weird, twisted way. It's no Wild Wild West. No. And it could have been. What I enjoy most is Alexis Canner at the end, where he's so unbelievably civilized. And that, just coming off of Fallout, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Gordan, what did you think?
I actually liked it. I think it was a way to, basically it was done because they had one episode they needed to write. And McGowan said, I want to do a Western. I think it kind of shows how flexible like the ideas behind The Prisoner are, where they essentially do a fake out where you think it's going, all of a sudden it's this Western motif. And because Westerns at the time kind of automatically brought ideas of like the frontier and men having to deal with tough decisions, the fact that they're able to pull it off as they did. And we're talking about a British television company, so they're probably not going to do a TV Western as well. To me, it's one of the hidden treasures. I will say that I thought Alexis Canner, from my position, just all the way through, felt a little too performy. Yeah, you could tell he was acting.
It's a very theatrical performance.
Like I was kind of wishing Chris Pennick from Dark Shadows played the role, because it'd still be the same, I think, a similar performance, but there'd be a lot more intentionality and emotion and heart behind it.
I think they could have gotten some Western TV actors too, a little bit too. That's my only real big issue with this episode, because they talked about this in the documentary that a lot of the number twos were from the UK, so it made you think, is the British government running the village? But
sure.
There's some comparison here too. Now, how this episode starts with him turning in his gun. Now, it's not a dream sequence, but there's a very popular series in the 80s called MacGyver that's going to do a very similar opening for a Western, where MacGyver falls asleep in his boathouse and he has a dream and he's turning in his gun. He has this mustache and he's retired. He's basically, I'm not going to use a gun no more. Now, McGowan's doing the same thing, similar, but he's resigning. He's resigning from his job. More so here than the MacGyver episode. But the opening is sort of similar in a way. You'll have to go watch that episode to check it out. Really, by the way, Michael Des Barres does play a Murdoch in the Wild Wild West in that episode. But with this, I really like how they shoot this. This looks like a very television Western that you would see. Some frontier, but what you see most of is the town. Sort of the town is their village, if you will. And there's a shot too in this scene where you see that, like, when he's fighting in town, it sort of looks like the village a bit, and I gotta believe that's on purpose.
Yeah, it is. I think, because I think the plan was to somehow to put number 6 in a situation where, and I'm just kind of I'm just speculating that maybe the idea was to have number 6 actually commit violence against someone or kill someone that would make him break, because at the end, number 2 is telling off Alexis Canner, hey, look, you said to give him drugs, you said to take him, give him headphones and give him through, not like, hey, I messed up, but it's that kind of whole, like, he basically listened to the younger person. But I think the idea behind the town was to put number 6 in. And I wonder, and this is pure speculation, I wonder if this reveals something about number 6, because I don't know how prevalent how popular Westerns were in England at that time. I don't know in terms of if they.
My impression is, and this has always been in terms of American media, if it's American, it's popular. I know that sounds like an oversimplification, but maybe the truth is overly simple.
Well, but I think it might talk to like what, why put number 6 in that particular arena. I can understand like the psychology of it, that he's a man of principle. So of course you put him in the Wild West rather than say Elizabethan England or, on a movie set with Pauly Shore. I mean, you want to put him in a place where he's going to react well, where when you force him to make that choice, he's going to break.
I mean, Biodome, is there really that much of a difference between that and The Prisoner? Yes.
Actually, yeah. There's no Leo McKern and no Angela Muscat. That's the main difference.
Much to its discredit.
You need Angela Muscat for The Prisoner. He is a must.
I agree.
I think if they would have waited to do, like, if The Prisoner would have picked up a second season, for example, and they would have waited to the 70s to do this Western episode, it wouldn't have worked. And I'll explain to you why. With the tail end of the 60s, the Westerns were sort of, you had the spaghetti Westerns that were coming into full swing with fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, but there were also other Westerns like The Great Silence and the Wild Bunch that me and Butch have covered. With the 70s, and I've talked about this in another video, and I know Patrick was a part of that video too, you could not get arrested for making a Western in the 70s. Westerns were pretty much all but died out. I mean, yeah, Clint made some in the 70s that were good, like The Outlaw Josie Wells and Hang 'Em High. But other than that, you really had United Artists made a Western that completely bombed, and I can't even tell you who was in it. I forget the actor who was in it, but it was a completely different switch from where Westerns started to what they were in the 70s. In many ways, Westerns were like horror movies. They came sort of oversaturated, sort of like the superhero movie is sort of starting to become. And I mean, everything gets oversaturated to a degree, but Westerns were by the 70s. And people were just turned off by them. And by the time when they bombed, the next Western you got wasn't until the 80s. And that started Clint Eastwood too, and that was Pale Rider. With this, I told you guys I was going to give my explanation how I felt this should have been the final episode. I think they should have took every number 2 and had them be a key figure in this town, and that includes Leo McKern. Sort of had the Magnificent Seven of gunslingers, but had them be evil, and they were protecting the village secrets, if you will. And here's number 6, Patrick McGowan, who's sort of your lone gunman, but in many ways, he's mimicking Shane. Shane did not want to, I believe Shane was out by this time. Shane did not want to pick up his gun anymore. He didn't want to use his gun, and Shane was a gunslinger. Well, there's a moment where, hey, cowboy, you got to pick up your gun and spurs. Now, you have no choice in the matter, and Shane has to. And that's basically Patrick McGowan's character is Shane in this episode, in my view, because he has to pick up his gun and use it.
Well, if you notice, in the beginning, he gives up his badge and his gun.
Yep.
He picks up the badge later on, but not the gun.
Yep.
Then he puts the badge down and picks up the gun. I think the main issue with doing this in the second season, I don't think The Prisoner would have had a second season, because even if the money people said, okay, you get your 6 episodes for a full 22 episode season, McGowan would have said, no, it's done in one. There's no way we can take it after it. And I think McGowan was egotistical enough that he would have cut it off. I do think and I think with the reason why they did this particular in a Western is it brings up images of Shane, the Searchers with John Wayne having the door slammed in his, closing it in his face. It's the idea of he is, if in real life he's a secret agent who decided that he didn't want to do it anymore. In this episode, he's the guy who really doesn't want to have any responsibility like that, because in the West, a lot of times, you didn't always have like an appointed sheriff or like a U.S. Marshal. Sometimes it's like, I'm the mayor. Hey, Patrick, here's a gun. Here's a badge. You're the sheriff. And I think I think having all the number twos come back and kind of do that would be, I think they're trying to, I think the writer was going for more of a very simple metaphor. And I think doing that might have been a good idea, but I don't think they would have done that. And I don't think that would have been, I think that would have been like, now we'd say it's like fan service. It's like, get it, get it, get it. But I think by keeping it in that simple Western motif and using those, it's a nice visual shortcut. It's like, if you see a guy with a hockey mask and a machete, what's the first thing you're going to think of? And as Patrick would say, you'll think of Orson Welles and frozen peas.
I wish. Gosh. Jason would have tried to kill him, but he couldn't have gotten through to a vital organ.
Yeah, I mean,
too much padding.
Yeah, and of course, at one point, as he's trying, Welles would say, "Is there no depth to your ignorance?"
Your ignorance, sir, which is vast. I think I said something like that. And then he threatened to fillet him, as I recall from that.
Oh, I thought it was make cheese together. Oh, no, I'm thinking of the Pinky and the Brain version.
Yeah. No, Orson makes a reference to that extent. He says, if there's any way you can show me how you can use such and such word in a sentence as the operative word, and then he makes an unsavory offer.
Now, I kind of wish Orson Welles had been a number two.
Oh, he would have been fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
What's you guys' favorite scene in this episode?
For me, when they get back to the village, it's one of those things where, Gordon, you correctly said there's a lot of get it, see,
Mm-hmm.
get it, and I get it. So that's, and I really genuinely try to stay positive about the media that I talk about. This one makes it tough. It's a really cool idea, but it's a cooler idea if you already kind of speak 60s Western as and I don't, and so it makes it very challenging for me in that regard.
They are sort of borrowed from another movie, another Western too. Gordon, you talked about how most towns don't have an assigned sheriff. There's a movie that me and Butch did called The Citizen at Sundown that sort of does, where the guy has a lot of money and he basically handpicks the sheriff in a lot of ways. His money influences the guy who has the badge and who got the badge. And the town didn't used to be that way, but it became that way. I think that's the biggest difference with This Isn't at Sundown and the plot overall. But with this, they're sort of taking from every little Western that's been made and applying it. Like you said, there is some Shane, there's some John Wayne reference here with the Searchers, but I like it. I enjoy it. I get everything they're trying to do.
You're the ideal audience, Jewel, because that is you speak fluent Western,
right? And I think there's enough there that it's not that it isn't too. It's not trying to pull. I think they're using the Western as a way, as like a nice shortcut, if that makes sense. Like, if you're going to do, say, something about fascism, you'll set it in 1930s Germany. It's that kind of automatic. I think for what it is, it does a really good job. It's kind of like and the only equivalent I can think of in more modern times is the series Deadwood, but on HBO. I don't know if either of you are familiar with that show.
I went to school with one of the actors on Deadwood.
Was it Timothy Oliphant?
No, it wasn't. I know he's quite the rage in Minnesota. No, it's a fellow named Sean Bridgers, and I'm looking up what he played on Deadwood. But yeah, he played Johnny Burns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the ointment salesman. Mm-hmm. No, he wasn't an ointment salesman, but on that show. I never watched it. I hear they say something that rhymes with block tucker a lot. That's the most I know, and that it's supposed to be a good show.
Yeah, it's basically, it uses profanity in a very creative and poetic way.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. Also check out Hell on Wheels. It's free on Tubi.
Wait, that's the show with Anson Mount.
Yes, that is. And that show, if I can digress for a bit, actually got into a not controversy, but it's focusing on, it's focusing on the establishment of the railroad. They're building the railroad, and there were some alleged historical experts who said, you're getting it wrong, because aren't you forgetting about the Chinese who helped? And the producers countered with, okay, here's the deal. As they were building the railroad, they were building it two ways. If you came from the West, you had whites and blacks and Chinese, because they were coming in from China, from the West. Yeah. The show is focusing on the one coming from the East, where it was mostly white and black. So it's kind of like they didn't, they were accused of being like politically correct, or, whatever the hip phrase was for that. But it was basically, historically, there were two efforts, because that's where you had the golden spike in the middle. And then Anson Mount beams up to the starship. He shaves, and he turns to Ethan Peckus Bach and says, you know what, dude, one day you're going to have more gray hair than I will. So watch.
Have you seen that show?
What, Hell on Wheels?
No, Strange New Worlds.
Yes, I have.
What do you think?
I think it's
well, digressing.
I think it's a really good Trek show. I think it's a really good Trek show. I think it's nice to have something that is relatively straightforward. Like Picard is a nostalgia fest, but it kind of has to be. Yeah. I love Lower Decks, but I just love the fact that it's basically as many in-jokes about Trek as possible. Discovery, I think, season 3 is my season 1 of that show. Because season 1 and 2 were, season 1 was kind of the showrunners who got fired towards the end of production decided it was Game of Thrones in space. And then season 2 was course correcting for what happened in season 1. And I haven't seen Prodigy.
I hear Prodigy is very good. Steve, oh God, I'm a big fan of his. Steve Shives gave it a very, very, very good review that said all the right things. So, yeah.
Well, for Hell on Wheels, the Chinese workers don't come till like the last season when the West is.
Yeah, because they're coming together.
Yeah, and Bohan switches railroads in the final season, which is interesting. Cole Meany gives a great performance, by the way. With Living in Harmony, this episode here, instead of having River, they use a posse, if you will, to rope him back into town when he tries to leave. So again, they're making another Western reference. I'll complain here. I don't think you need a posse. I just think you need, because he's unarmed, you just need one man with a gun pointing it right at him and shooting him off his horse, or shooting the gun in the air, causing the horse to go backward and him fall. You don't need a posse. I get the preference, but
Well, I think part of it is what they were. I think what they were trying to do, and I don't think they succeed in this very well. Which is, I think they're trying to make. I think the point of the episode was that violence is not the only way. And
Yeah.
yes, folks, tonight I'll be doing air quotes all night.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's why you have the posse. That's why, like, the woman, they have her brother about to be hung, and it's it's 60s style violence, but it's also I don't so you have the posse rather than Rover or anything else. And I don't think it quite works because I think if it had been produced in, say, the 90s, where you had a little bit more leeway in terms of what you could show on screen, I think they would have made it better. But I think it's one of those that, because of the limitations of the time and what you could get away with, I think it doesn't quite go there. I mean, I love the fact that they use the Western as a metaphor, and you could easily spin off. I could easily see a spin-off with a similar premise. A guy who goes to a far-off border town or someplace where there's no lawman, and he refuses to be a lawman, and the people in this town just keep wanting to pull him back, and they won't let him just like be, simply because he doesn't want to pick up a gun, he doesn't want to pick up a badge, he just wants to be left alone.
Yeah. Whatever. Okay, you guys still there?
Yeah, I'm giving it a lot of thought.
Overall, what did you think of the number 2 in this episode, guys?
Gordon, I'm gonna pass that one to you because I don't even remember, and I just watched it.
Yeah, I think for a guy who, I think he's probably the least memorable of the number 2s, because basically he just delegates it to, and my theory is that Alexis Canner's character, the reason he ends up the way he is in Fallout is, how they're talking about giving him how he's always drinking, and they talk about hallucinogenic drugs. He's drugging out, man. He's like, I could see him like,
Control.
Okay, 1 for you, 1 for number 6, 1 for me, 2 for number 6, 1, 2 for me, 3 for number 6, 1, 2, 3 for me. Yeah. I mean, he's an acid casualty, basically, in Fallout.
He's a victim of their own drugs, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think too, this number 2 just doesn't. He really doesn't give. He's just there.
Yeah. I think if you maybe cast more of a Western actor for the role of number 2 here, maybe a Lee Marvin, maybe a Chuck Connors from The Rifleman, you probably have a way better performance, because Lee Marvin knows how to play a villain for sure, and Chuck Connors knew how to act. God.
Yeah, I think it would have worked. I think the only problem would have been, at the time, there weren't too many actors willing to fly all the way out to England for just a guest shot. And at that point,
I don't know if the English would have paid for that.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like now where, you'll, it's a good idea. And if there were like an American actor who was living in England at the time, that would have been a great move, because that way you're selling the metaphor, because it's like, here's this big actor as a mayor, and then at the end, when it turns out, oh, he was number 2 all along, you go, okay, you make the metaphor works. That's why I like it. I like it because it uses a Western as a format, but that's why I don't think it doesn't really sell itself, because you're very aware that these are all British people.
Yeah. They need some rough Western actors to sort of fit the bill. They don't try to. I think that's the thing of this episode. I think them having the British actors, I don't necessarily think they're trying to wink and nod at the audience, but it's sort of, hey, this is an episode of The Prisoner after all, and we've been having British people this whole time.
You know what might have worked better than a Western for this?
What's that?
Doing kind of a 40s noir.
I was just about to ask that.
Because first off, you could do, with England, you just get different model cars. You get the streets wet. You even, if you want to be fancy about it, film in black and white. And one, it would have been you would have been really messing with people's heads back then. But also, you can make the same argument about a PI who doesn't use a gun, who is just tired of dealing with being walking down those mean streets, neither tarnished nor afraid. He could be, and that would make a much more interesting one. The metaphor works a little better. It fits a little more, because then instead of the woman being the saloon chanteuse, she is she's the femme fatale. Yeah, she's a gun moll. Instead of Alexis Canner being the kid, he is the kind of young street thug. And instead of number 2 being, and you've got, Brighton Ruck by Graham Greene is right there. You just use that as your template, and number 2 becomes the crime boss. And that would make the metaphor work a lot more. And if McGowan had said, you know what, I don't want to do a Western, I want to do a 1940s Philip Marlowe thing, that would have made it work beautifully.
Yeah.
Was he a fan of Westerns, McGowan?
I know he specifically wanted to do this episode. I'm not sure if he was an overall fan. I would assume that he was. Yeah. Because why would you do a Western if you're not necessarily a fan?
Well, because it was the predominant, story paradigm at the time. Mm-hmm. So just that's not saying that he wasn't a fan of the Western or whatnot, but I can see that as being a driving motivator there.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny when you hear there's a lot of sort of, okay, for the movie Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger wanted to do a Western. He didn't get to, so McTiernan is like, well, I got this movie called Predator. You could sort of do it like the Magnificent Seven.
Well, it's actually, it's also like, you can do a Western, you just don't call it a Western. Like, I will argue that Escape from New York is the best spaghetti Western / caper film that was done in the 80s. It has Lee Van Cleef. There's your evidence.
Yeah. And Harry Dean Stanton, although I never saw him in a Western, seems like he should have been in every Western made since 1977.
And Kurt Russell is kind of in that kind of man with no name, man with a code. Doesn't give a crap about what you think. He's going to follow his own drum. And I think, that is a much better version. As much as I like Living in Harmony, that's a much better version of Living in Harmony than what we got.
Well,
because at least there's that thinking behind it.
A lot of John Carpenter's movies are sort of Westernist. Look at the original Assault on Precinct 13. It sort of reminds me of El Dorado, not just El Dorado, but Rio Bravo.
Yeah.
Also, John Carpenter's The Vampires is a Western with vampires in every way. So in many ways, me and Butch had talked about this. In many ways, John Carpenter is a Western director directing horror movies.
Gentlemen, I am at time.
No problem.
It has been lovely. Let me know when the next episode is. Real life has reared its head.
Be seeing you, Patrick.
Take care.
Seeing you, Patrick.
But overall, where would you rank this episode among the ones we've watched so far, Gordan?
Let's see. Well, I would probably put it well, let's see. Let's look. We'll do Arrival. So if we do the 4, like the first 4 we did, Arrival, Free for All, Checkmate, and Dance of the Dead are all kind of my favorites. I'd put this around number 5 or 6 because it's not brilliant, but I think it's also, it's kind of like The Girl Who Was Death, which we will watch later. That's more of like a comedy, silly romp, but you kind of need this you need the break, because otherwise it's just village, They're trying to crack him, they fail. Like, you need that kind of variety. And I think the fact that they were trying to be a little bit more ambitious, that it wasn't just, okay, same, same, same. I think I probably give it a little bit more esteem than Patrick would, but I think also I can see where they were going with it. And I think I can commend them for the effort, even if the execution didn't quite make it, but I can see where it was, okay, we want to talk about violence and that not being the solution. How do we do that? We use an American Western as kind of you put the different characters and the different tropes and you let that play out. And I think had The Prisoner been an American production, I think it would have worked better, simply because we understand even if we can't articulate it, we know what makes a Western. You know what I mean? We know kind of how that kind of storytelling works. I'm not sure in England they have that. If they had set it up as, like, say, a 1940s, British crime drama or some kind of Victorian costume drama, thematically it wouldn't work with The Prisoner, but you could see where the metaphor might be. You could go, okay, it kind of fits. So if they if they set it up so number 6 is in Victorian times and he's investigating Jack the Ripper, like, okay, it's like, okay, fine, we see the matchup. For an American audience, it's easier to see because we speak Western. I'm not sure how well the British speak Western, but if you had said it as like a Shakespearean era drama, they'd get it, and we'd be like, no, that's boring. No, make it a Western.
Yeah. I didn't know what this episode was going to be like when I first watched it, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the way they shot it, the way they created it. It was very creative for what it is. I mean, you're taking a bold risk here in this episode by sort of straying away from what you've done all this time. And it is very different from the episodes we've seen. And I get that's the point, but it's still a hell of a risk, and it was a hell of a move. And I enjoy it for what it is.
Well, a little bit of the history about this episode is that when McGowan is flying back from filming Ice Station Zebra, he gets word from the production company, from the money people. They cut him off at 4. You've got 4 more episodes. You're overspending. That's it. So of those 4, they were finishing up. One of them was "Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling," which we'll watch later, and that was filmed to accommodate him filming. There was Fallout, and The Girl Who Was Deaf was part of that. So they needed an episode. And McGowan was going around literally asking, like, he was asking people in the production company, in the production team, who were not writers. Like, he was going to like the film like they had like a guy who would go to find like film clips. Hey, do you have a story idea? It's like, hey, Jewel, do you have a story idea? And eventually one of the I forget his position, but he and one of the producers worked on the idea for Living in Harmony. The producer wrote, directed, and produced it, a gentleman by the name of David Tomblin. And so that was it was a last minute, they needed an idea, and McGowan kind of said, okay, we're going to do a Western. And the reason why the gentleman with the idea was Ian Rankin. He lived in South Africa, and he was seeing a lot of the protests in that country. And he was kind of dealing with the fact that, okay, they're doing all this violent stuff, but it's really not working, and there's not really. So you can see where the thinking was, but Shane is a better version of Living in Harmony because you're dealing with a gunfighter and the effect on a little boy and his family. And when it finally happens, it's kind of like whoa. You kind of get to the sense of, okay, yeah, he's not just he knows he needs to take care of this, but he also wants to stay an example for the boy. Here, it doesn't quite work because a lot of times in the Old West, it was like, hey, we don't have any other sheriff. You're the guy. It wasn't like now it's like you would choose to be a cop and you might choose to become a detective or choose to be a superintendent and go up that route. Back then it was literally just okay, hey Joel, you spoke about last episode about how to cock a gun. Since you know how to use a gun, you're the sheriff. I mean, it was literally it's kind of like Wyatt Earp. You know about Wyatt Earp, right? To what a lot of people don't know is that he was not qualified to be a lawman in any sense of the word. He just walked into that because he was a gambler. I think he owned a couple of brothels. He was a rancher. Like he had all this stuff, and it was basically he shows up in Tombstone. Hey, we need a guy. In fact, he was put on trial after the shootout at the OK Corral.
Yeah.
But I think Living in Harmony, like I like it for what it is, but I can also see where it doesn't quite work the way it does. But that's good because you need that. It's kind of like they swung for the fence. I'd rather a show swing for the fences and maybe miss a little than to just stay safe.
Yeah, with Wyatt Earp, by the time he gets to Tombstone, in a sense, he already is an outlaw, and he wanted to be an outlaw even more. He actually wanted what Wyatt Earp wanted. For those who don't know, he wanted Bohan's job because Bohan was a tax collector. He wanted to make the money by being the tax collector. Now, the one thing that Tombstone sort of mentions Bohan being the tax collector, but they don't follow up on it. Now, the one thing both films get extremely wrong is when the OK Corral fight happens, it actually happens when it was snowing because Tombstone is near the mountains. So that's, again, I'm nitpicking about movies I like, but they're about historical accuracy and figures. And I was talking about this with Butch that when you get into, Ringo, people say, well, did Doc Holliday or did Wyatt Earp kill him? Well, number one, Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday didn't kill him. Doc Holliday, when the Vendetta ride happened, by the time it happened and by the time it was ending, Doc Holliday was in Denver. He was sick from tuberculosis.
Right.
And Wyatt Earp, I would say, didn't kill Johnny Ringo either. I would say Johnny Ringo killed himself. He put a bullet in his brain. Because it was so, again, he was being hunted down by the Earp and his brothers, and their posse, basically. And so, basically, you had a lot of craziness go on in Tombstone. But there's another Western that what the frick happened there? Okay. That just paused out. Sorry about that.
Yes, Skype does tend to be goofy, so no big deal.
So there's another Western, Living in Harmony, sort of borrowing from. You talked about the sheriff, where somebody doesn't want to be the sheriff. Actually, in the movie Warlock, nobody wants to be the sheriff, so they hire an outside gunman in Henry Fonda. But until Richard Widmark's character volunteers to be the sheriff. Now, there's a bit of difference, but there was some of the resemblances there in this episode. I really like how they, again, really good. They use drugs for her hip, like they have him on drugs and stuff. I didn't mind all that. I they needed to have a way to have him be in the Wild West, which made sense.
Well, I think too that the idea was, and this was kind of because this was the late '60s, there was a lot of the perception was hallucinogenic drugs were evil. And I think that the idea, I mean, it's a good idea. Like, okay, we're going to pretend we're going to put this person in a kind of familiar situation, but we're going to push him to do something bad. And I think the fact that at the end, number 2 makes a point of saying, I shouldn't have, tells cosplay Chris Pennick, look, I listened to you, and this is going to be on my head, but you wanted me to do the drugs, you wanted me to push him forward. And I think the fact that I mean, it's a plot point that now maybe doesn't quite.
Hello?
But idea to push number 6 into a morally compromising situation is a good idea, but I think that even though the drugs are kind of a little bit overboard, I do kind of see the logic of it, because if they're telling him, I mean, the thing I never understood is, okay, when you've got like he shoots the kid down, and okay, the kid falls, and then when he comes out of it, he looks and he finds that it's a cardboard cutout, and it's like, were all the people who were like killed cardboard cutouts, or did they like put on costumes and then just kind of run away? You know what I mean?
I gather that the drug hallucinogen is so strong that the cardboard cutouts are sort of look like real people. That's what I gather. But it's also like you said, the character, the kid, he's on it too. So it's like, how is that? That's sort of that is the biggest confusing part. How is this exactly working when it isn't just one person who's on the medicine?
Right. Well, I kind of think that I was making that point about the kid as a joke, but I could also understand where if he's being chided, um, with Fallout, that character is accused of just being rebellious because it's young and it's hip, and of course you're going to be rebellious.
Right.
So it kind of makes sense that after this, maybe he just says, you know what, I'm part of the village power elite. I've got all these drugs. It's party time.
Yeah. He's his performance in the final episode is really really good.
And it's funny too, because when you look at both of these, there's a very, if Chris Pennick had been in Dark Shadows in like 67, 66, 67, I could probably see where Alexis Cantor, the actor, is trying to do a Chris Pennick, because I just think Pennick would have still done similar things, but with Kenner, there's no real energy there. It just feels very much like I'm acting. And I think in Fallout, he may have actually been tripping, because it just comes across as very phony and kind of like it's like, look at me and theatrical. Whereas someone like Pennick would have similar choices, but there'd been a lot more heart and emotion behind it. For Pennick, it would have been like, hey, I've got this character. And he would have seen that through. Whereas Alexis is kind of more, you kind of get the sense that it's more like, oh, okay, I'm on camera. I've got to emote and scene.
Yeah, I think he could have did a better job of not trying to act. There's such a thing as acting too hard. I think Patrick McGowan just did a fabulous job in this episode with just acting with everybody in this episode. I enjoyed it. What did you think overall?
Well, I think he had a good job, but I think because he was doing something that he wanted to do, and that really the story kind of it was a change of pace, because I could see where he's coming from a movie where I'm sure there was a lot of more logistical issues. He's kind of been given the, hey, Patrick, wrap this up. I could see where he's going into this as just kind of fun. He's going into this with a sense of fun, and I think that shows. I think that overall, though, like, it may not be the strongest episode of The Prisoner in terms of the script, but I think just from a creative, we got to do something different. I mean, imagine if this had come after this for like episode 5, where you learn about the village, and all of a sudden you're turning it on, and you say, the first thing you're probably thinking is, oh, wait, I see a gun and a badge being put. Wait, I'm watching that prison. I'm supposed to watch Prisoner. I don't know what this. And you see, oh, okay, it's the Prisoner guy. It's McGowan. Yeah, I see the blue eyes and the intense look. And then, okay, you see him walk down, and then the posse beats him up, and you see the title Living in Harmony. You're thinking, I mean, that must have been, I mean, it wasn't shown in America on first run because the story was that one cited reason was the use of hallucinogenic drugs.
Yeah.
And then some people thought, well, okay, it's Vietnam. It's talking about not picking up your guns. There's an interview with one of the executives at the time, and what he said was the reason why they chose not to show it. There's a news item, and he didn't specify what news item, but he thought that in the context of that, showing this episode would have been in poor taste.
Yeah.
But I can see where if you're watching this, you're thinking, this isn't the show that I tuned into. But when you look at it, when you start getting into it, it's like, oh, now I see why they're doing it. And then at the end, it's kind of oh, by the way, that show you thought you missed, this is the show you're watching.
Yeah, I think like they do a good job of it being a prisoner episode overall, because there's moments the town sort of looks like the village a bit, and the way they're sort of acting, they're not sort of going too far. They're not going far enough away to it not being a prisoner episode from an acting standpoint. I just think when you watch the opening, because again, I talked about this with Fallout. The opening, you don't get the video intro, but you get the music, and you get an overhead shot. Well, here you don't get the video. you get McGowan handing in the gun and living in harmony, and it's just it's a Western open, and it's just like, oh wow, and it's shot really well, you know.
Yeah, and with the intro, there's two alternatives that either way would have really spoiled the effect. The first is you tack on the traditional, he's driving in the car, he goes in, he pounds his fist, he breaks a teacup, he's gassed, and then instead of him waking up in the village, he wakes up in the Western town. Yeah. But you've just kind of broken the illusion because as a viewer, you're thinking, oh, okay, well, he's in a Western town. It must be time travel, or it must be aliens. You're not thinking drugs. The second thing would have been to do the opening, but do it Western style. So you have McGowan riding on a horse. He walks into a saloon. He puts his gun and his badge down, and he pounds the table in front of the number two who's playing solitaire. Then he leaves, and then he encounters the posse. And that would have felt a little bit like they were sending themselves up. They were kind of making fun of them. That's what I love about that intro, is that it tells you it reminds you that you're watching the same show, but it does it in a way that says, yeah, we're doing something different. I mean, if you cut off that last piece of Back in the Village, you could easily see and you just wrote a different ending. You could see this as like a Western version of The Prisoner, about a guy who wants to give up his guns, but he has to keep coming back, and people won't let him, and he's being pushed to do things that he does not want to do.
I don't think I have any more questions for you, Gordon. Is there anything?
Again, it's not the greatest episode, but I like it because stylistically it's just so different.
Yeah. It looks beautiful too, the way they shoot this. The camera operators deserve a hell of a lot of credit. And McGowan wanting to do a Western is interesting to me. I mean, I get he might want to cash in a bit on the popularity of the Western at that time.
Yeah, and I think too, it was also not just the popularity, but it's just there's a lot of shorthand. So you don't have to worry about. It's like if it had been a noir, kind of a British noir, or even like a noir detective story, we'd identify where it would go. We know it's like, okay, this, so how some of these are going to play out, but it's more for recognition. That way you're not. If they had tried to do this in the Village, I'm not sure it would work.
They could have even for they could have even did like a Casablanca type of thing too.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that. I just think the reason they did it as a Western is that McCoy said, "Hey, I'm the star, I'm the writer, I'm the director. I want to do a Western." If he had said, "I want to do Brighton Rock, I want to do Raymond Chandler," they would have done that. And not only would they have done it on a better budget, but you could really just the theme of the story really would stand out better.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a fun episode to watch. It's really enjoyable. Guys, go check out The Prisoner, Living in Harmony. Really, really good. It's free on Tubi. The entire series is. You can go give it a watch. Really good stuff. Is there anything you want to add, Gordon?
Nope, I think we've pretty much covered it.
Links to the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound for Patrick McCray and links to Gordon's Amazon page will both be in the description box. Go follow Gordon it's at Gordan Dymowski, I believe, on Twitter.
Yeah, it's at Gordan Dim, GORDONDYM.
At Gordan Dim on Twitter. Go follow Patrick McCray at The Real McCray on Twitter. Go follow these gentlemen. They're very, very smart. It's always a pleasure, guys. And what's the next episode we're doing?
Let's see. Let's go back to something a little bit more traditional. So why don't we do Hammer into Anvil?
Okay.
Because it's going to take us back to the village. It's one that it's a little bit more kind of a traditional prisoner episode. It's one of my favorite episodes. But I think in this way, what we can do is, okay, Patrick, if you're watching, you have to write a 10,000 word essay and get it to us about this episode and get it to us before the podcast.
I'll put that in the message box on Facebook and Twitter. So
I'm just kidding, Patrick. You don't need to write that. You've got enough writing to do, Patrick. We'll leave it there.
Oh my God.
But for you at home, yeah, you write an essay. You can go watch Hammer into Anvil. Watch Living in Harmony. Watch The Whole Prisoner. Follow along. Start arguments with us on YouTube.
I'm trying to get as many people as I can to go be seeing you.
Well, you know what? That's actually a reference. You can find the movie on YouTube. It's a British crime film called The Spider and the Fly from 1949. Eric Porter, the number 2 from Free for All, is actually in this story. Spider and the Fly is about a policeman who is after like a known burglar, and it's kind of a cat and mouse. That's why it's Spider and the Fly. And at the end, the criminal is leaving. And one of the things that Eric Porter, the policeman, does, he's got a cigarette. And at the end, as the criminal's going off, he holds it like this. Is your mind blown, people? I think your minds are blown.
Very, very nice. Gordon, it's always a pleasure, buddy. You take care. Have a good night, dude.
You too. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.